I never expected a quiet afternoon in my garden to turn into one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. But when Jacob, my neighbor, appeared with a simple offer to help, everything shifted. What began as shared laughter over muddy hands and stubborn weeds soon became a moment of unexpected connection, one that made me question how little I truly let myself enjoy companionship. In the gentle sunlight of late spring, I discovered something I hadn't felt in years, that quiet joy of being seen, understood, and unexpectedly understood by someone new. Don't forget subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments which city you are listening from. This is very important for us. And now, enjoy listening. I was kneeling in the flower bed, pulling stubborn weeds from the soil, when I first heard the familiar crunch of gravel under someone's shoes. I glanced up, squinting into the afternoon sun, and saw Jacob leaning against the fence, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his worn jeans. He gave me that easy half-smile he always reserved for neighbors and acquaintances, friendly but somehow warmer today. "Looks like you could use a hand," he said, nodding toward the bed where I was battling a particularly aggressive patch of dandelions. I hesitated for just a moment. I've always liked my garden work solitary, a kind of therapy after the hum of daily responsibilities. But there was something in his tone, gentle, unassuming, that made me pause. "Actually," I admitted, brushing dirt from my hands onto my knees, "this one patch has been giving me trouble all morning. I could use a second pair of hands." He grinned, and just like that, he was beside me, kneeling in the soil. The sun was warm on our backs, and the quiet buzz of bees and the distant bark of a dog made the moment feel suspended in time. We worked side by side, our hands brushing occasionally as we tugged at stubborn roots, and I found myself laughing at small things, his exaggerated grimace every time a root resisted, my own clumsiness as I tried to balance on the uneven earth. "You have a serious green thumb," he said, tilting his head to study the blooms I had planted earlier. "I don't think my garden has ever looked this good." I felt a sudden warmth spread through me at his words. Compliments didn't come easily, not anymore. Not since life had become so routine, so occupied with work and obligations. I realized I had missed being appreciated just for being me. We paused for a moment, breathing in the scent of fresh soil and lavender. He handed me a trowel, and our fingers brushed. I didn't pull away, though a flutter of something, excitement, perhaps curiosity, ran through me. It felt strange and familiar all at once, like meeting someone halfway between memory and possibility. "Tell me the story behind these," he said, pointing to a small patch of marigolds at the corner. I laughed softly. "They're my little rebellion against order," I admitted. "I plant what I love, even if it doesn't fit the perfect garden standard." His eyes softened, and for a moment he simply nodded, taking in the colors, the scents, the effort that had gone into this small corner of my world. There was respect there, genuine and quiet, and I found myself wanting to share more, not just about flowers, but about the small choices and habits that made up my days. The afternoon slipped by without us noticing. We shared stories of childhood gardens, misadventures with lawnmowers, and the stubbornness of plants that refused to cooperate. Every laugh, every glance, every brush of dirt-streaked hands felt like layers being peeled back, gently, carefully, with mutual curiosity. By the time we sat back on the grass, surveying the freshly tended garden, my hands were scratched and dirty, my knees sore, but I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Jacob leaned back on his hands, watching the sunlight dance on the petals of the flowers we had nurtured together. "You know," he said quietly, almost hesitantly, "I wasn't sure I should come over, but I'm glad I did." I smiled, feeling a strange, comforting heat in my chest. "Me too," I admitted, surprising myself with how natural the words felt. There was a pause then, a quiet that wasn't awkward but charged in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was more than neighborly appreciation, more than casual conversation. It was the beginning of an understanding, one of shared effort, laughter, and subtle emotional resonance that neither of us had expected to find in a few hours spent among flowers and soil. I realized as I wiped my hands on my apron and looked at him that this garden, my sanctuary, my escape, had somehow become a place for something else entirely: connection, trust, and a tender reminder that even at 47, life could still surprise you with moments of unexpected joy. As he got up to leave, brushing the dirt from his jeans, he looked back at me. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, with that easy smile again. I found myself laughing, not at the question, but at how eagerly I wanted to say yes. "I think I'd like that," I said, watching him walk down the path toward his own house, a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the garden glowed in gold and orange, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, replaying every glance, every laugh, every quiet moment. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was part of something, someone's day, someone's world. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, letting someone in didn't mean losing yourself. It could mean discovering a new version of joy you had forgotten existed. The garden, once my solitary refuge, had quietly turned into a place of possibility. And with Jacob's simple offer to help, it had become the starting point of something that neither of us could have planned, but both of us would remember. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds chirping and sunlight streaming through the curtains. My garden had never looked so inviting, but I had to admit, part of me was nervous. I wasn't sure why. It was just Jacob, my neighbor, coming to help with more weeding and planting. Yet after yesterday, the thought of spending hours with him in the quiet intimacy of my little garden made my stomach flutter in a way I hadn't felt in years. By the time I stepped outside, he was already there, kneeling near the marigolds with a small trowel in hand. He looked up as I approached and gave me that same easy, reassuring smile that made my chest warm. "Morning, Julie," he said casually, but there was something soft in his tone, almost like he'd been waiting for me. "Good morning," I replied, brushing my hair back and trying to steady my voice. I hadn't realized how aware I'd become of him, his presence, his movements, the quiet way he focused on the plants. We didn't speak much at first, letting the work guide us. There was a rhythm to it, pulling weeds, planting seeds, brushing dirt from our hands onto our knees. I noticed the way his hands moved, careful, deliberate, yet confident. He didn't rush, and there was a quiet respect in the way he navigated the small space we shared. It was calming, grounding, almost hypnotic. At one point, our knees brushed as we both reached for the same clump of stubborn weeds. I felt a brief, electric spark shoot through me. Jacob looked at me, eyebrows raised, and then grinned. "Seems we're a good team," he said, his voice low and warm. I laughed, a little breathlessly. "Apparently so," I admitted, feeling the subtle tension linger like a soft hum in the air between us. We worked in companionable silence for a while, only broken by the occasional comment or laugh at some small mishap, my dropping a spade, his grimacing at a particularly stubborn root. It was ordinary, mundane work, but somehow the shared effort made it feel intimate. I realized that these moments, the small touches, the casual smiles, the shared satisfaction at a job well done, were the moments that mattered most. When we finally paused for a break, sitting side by side on the edge of the garden bed with our knees brushing, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't thinking about the world outside my yard, about obligations, errands, or responsibilities. All that existed was Jacob, the warm sun on my back, and the faint scent of fresh soil and blooming flowers. "You know," he said quietly, almost as if he were hesitant to break the silence, "I didn't expect yesterday to feel like that." I looked at him, curious. "Like what?" "Like this. Being here with you," he admitted, his eyes flicking to mine. There was vulnerability there, an honesty that made my heart skip. It feels right. Unexpected, but right. I felt a lump in my throat. It was rare for me to hear someone speak so openly, to acknowledge emotions without hiding behind small talk or casual gestures. And in that moment, I realized I felt the same way. "I know what you mean," I said softly. "I didn't expect this either, but it feels nice. Safe, comfortable." He nodded, and for a few moments, we simply sat there, letting the warmth of the sun and the quiet companionship fill the space between us. It was a different kind of intimacy, not physical, not rushed, but deeply emotional. It was knowing that someone truly saw you, without judgment, without pretense. After our break, we returned to the garden, working on the new flower beds I had planned. Jacob showed me how to space the plants properly, and I found myself watching him, noticing the little things, the way he smiled when a plant finally took root, the gentle way he corrected my placement of a small lavender bush. There was patience in him, and attention to detail that mirrored my own love for the garden. As the afternoon wore on, the sun began to lower, casting long golden shadows across the yard. I felt a contentment I hadn't known in years, a quiet happiness that didn't demand anything from me except presence. And yet there was a subtle tension in the air, a quiet electricity in the way our hands sometimes brushed, in the way our eyes lingered just a moment too long. When Jacob finally stood to leave, brushing dirt from his knees, I felt a pang of disappointment. Not sadness exactly, but the kind of longing that comes from realizing you don't want the moment to end. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, as he always did, his smile warm, hopeful. "Yes," I said without hesitation, and I realized I meant it more deeply than I had yesterday. "I'd like that." As he walked back toward his house, I lingered in the garden, breathing in the scent of the flowers and the sun-warmed soil. I thought about how small, simple moments, kneeling side by side in the dirt, sharing quiet laughter, feeling seen, could carry so much meaning. I realized that my connection with Jacob wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was in the small, everyday moments, the way he noticed the details, the way we worked together without needing to talk constantly, the way our laughter and quiet glances filled the spaces between words. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of anticipation for tomorrow, not for something extraordinary to happen, but for the simple act of sharing time, presence, and understanding with someone who mattered. As the evening settled and shadows deepened in the garden, I sat on the porch, sipping tea and letting the stillness wash over me. I thought about the unexpected beauty of companionship, the quiet thrill of emotional connection, and the tender possibility that life could still surprise me in ways I hadn't imagined. In the garden, I had found more than flowers. I had found a space where I could be vulnerable, seen, and appreciated, and in Jacob's presence, I felt a gentle, growing warmth that hinted at something more, something worth exploring slowly, thoughtfully, and with care. The morning was cooler than usual, with a crispness that hinted winter was still lingering in the corners of early spring. I stepped outside and immediately noticed the dew glistening on the leaves, tiny droplets catching the sunlight like scattered jewels. Jacob was already there, crouched near the rose bushes, carefully pruning the brittle branches. I hesitated for a moment, savoring the sight, the way his concentration softened the lines in his face, how the sunlight highlighted the strands of gray in his hair. "Morning, Julie," he said, glancing up and giving me that easy, familiar smile. "Good morning," I replied, my voice lighter than I expected. My heart had learned a rhythm of anticipation around him, a small, quiet pulse of excitement that I hadn't felt in years. We worked side by side, pruning, planting, and sharing small bits of conversation, but there was a new layer to it today. Each word felt charged with possibility, each brush of our hands against the soil or at each other carrying a weight we both seemed aware of but unspoken. "You really know your way around a garden?" he said, breaking a comfortable silence. "I think I could learn a lot from you." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "You're not bad yourself," I teased. "I've seen your careful touch. You treat every plant like it matters." He looked at me then, not as a neighbor, not as someone helping with a chore, but with a gentleness that made me pause. There was a kind of honesty in his gaze that stripped away all pretense. "I do care," he said quietly. "Not just about the plants, but about this. About us being here together." I felt my chest tighten. I had known, in a vague, distant way, that this connection between us was growing, but hearing him voice it aloud made the emotions swell. I wanted to respond, to reach out, but I also wanted to savor this moment, to let it breathe, delicate and unhurried. We continued working, our conversation drifting between trivialities and confessions. He told me about his childhood garden, about the afternoons spent with his father learning to prune, to water, to nurture life with patience. I shared stories of my own mother, who had instilled in me a love for flowers and the quiet magic of tending something and watching it grow. As the sun climbed higher, the warmth on my back was comforting, and I noticed how close we had become without realizing it. Our knees brushed more often now, our hands sometimes nearly touching as we reached for the same plant or clump of soil. Each accidental touch sent a ripple of something I hadn't expected, something tender and electric. "Julie," Jacob said softly, almost as if he were afraid to break the spell of the morning. "I'm glad we're doing this. You make it easier to feel connected to the world again." I felt a lump in my throat, a rush of emotion that surprised me. "You have no idea how much that means to me," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't felt this kind of ease in a long time. Not with anyone." He reached for a small watering can and handed it to me, his fingers brushing mine briefly. The touch lingered in a way that was neither rushed nor forced. It was acknowledgement, an unspoken understanding that this wasn't just about flowers or gardening. It was about trust, attention, and the beginning of something fragile and beautiful. We moved to a new section of the garden, where I had been planning to plant a small row of tulips. Jacob knelt beside me, helping me space the bulbs evenly, guiding my hands gently. We were close enough now that I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, warm and woody, and it made my heart beat faster. "You have a way of making everything feel right," he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. There was no pressure in his tone, only sincerity. I didn't know I needed this until now. I swallowed, feeling the heat in my cheeks, and managed a small laugh. "I think we both needed it," I admitted, "more than we realized." We continued planting, the subtle intimacy growing with each shared glance and quiet word. By the time the tulips were all nestled into the soil, the sun had moved lower, casting a golden glow across the garden. I stepped back to admire our work, and Jacob did the same, standing close enough that our shoulders almost touched. "I didn't expect to feel this way about spending an afternoon in a garden," he said, voice low, almost shy. "But I do. I feel lighter, happier, and I think it's because of you." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the honesty in his expression. It was rare to feel this kind of connection with someone who respected boundaries, yet was present fully and warmly in every moment. I realized I had been holding back for too long, afraid of letting someone in, afraid of vulnerability. But now, standing there in the golden afternoon light, I wanted to let myself feel it fully. "Jacob," I said softly, "I'm glad you're here. Truly." He smiled, a slow, gentle smile that made my chest swell. "Me too," he replied. The evening settled around us, the garden glowing with the soft light of the setting sun. We lingered a little longer, talking quietly, sharing more stories, laughing at memories from years past. There was an unspoken understanding between us now, a subtle tension tempered by respect and genuine affection. As he finally stood to leave, he brushed the dirt from his hands, lingering just a moment longer than usual. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, that familiar, hopeful look in his eyes. "Yes," I said with a warmth that surprised me. "I'd like that very much." Watching him walk back to his house, I felt a sense of quiet anticipation. I realized this connection, this growing intimacy, wasn't just about gardening. It was about trust, about allowing someone to see you in a way that few people ever could. And I wanted to explore it, carefully, thoughtfully, and fully, letting it bloom at its own pace. That night, I sat on the porch, the garden bathed in moonlight, reflecting on the morning. I realized that in these simple, quiet moments, kneeling in soil, laughing at small mishaps, sharing stories and touches, I had discovered a kind of joy I had forgotten existed. A joy that was tender, respectful, and deeply emotional. And I knew with a certainty that surprised me that I wanted to see where it could lead. The garden had changed with the seasons, the blooms growing taller, colors brighter, and the air warmer as spring slipped gently into early summer. I stepped outside that morning, and the scent of roses, lavender, and freshly turned soil greeted me like an old friend. Jacob was already there, crouched near the vegetable patch, carefully planting seedlings in neat rows. The sight of him kneeling in the soft earth made my chest tighten in a familiar, comforting way. "Morning, Julie," he said, looking up and smiling. That smile, it was steady, warm, and honest, made me forget everything else for a moment. "Morning," I replied, walking over with my gloves in hand, feeling a surge of anticipation and ease all at once. We fell into our usual rhythm, moving together in the garden with a comfortable synchronicity. There was a quiet understanding now, a subtle intimacy that didn't need words. Our hands brushed occasionally, deliberately gentle touches that sent tiny sparks of awareness through me. Each glance, each smile, carried more weight than either of us acknowledged, yet we both felt it. At one point, Jacob handed me a watering can, our fingers brushing lightly. I paused, looking into his eyes, and for a moment it felt like the world had shrunk to the space between us. There was trust there, a sense of shared vulnerability that was rare and precious. "July," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "I've been meaning to tell you something. These past few weeks, spending time here with you, it's been more meaningful than I realized. I didn't just enjoy helping in the garden. I enjoy being with you." I felt my breath catch. It wasn't shocking, exactly. I had felt it too, but hearing him say it aloud made the connection undeniable. "Jacob, I feel the same way," I admitted. "It's not just the garden for me either. It's everything. The time we spend together, the way we talk, the way you notice things. It matters." He smiled softly, kneeling down to plant a small row of tomatoes, his focus gentle and careful. "I was worried," he admitted, "that I might be overstepping, that maybe you'd think it was too much, but I wanted you to know how I feel." I reached out, brushing a stray leaf from his shoulder. "You're not overstepping," I said. "I'm glad you said it. I think I was afraid to admit it myself." There was a pause, the quiet only filled by the faint hum of bees and the rustle of leaves in the warm breeze. Then, almost instinctively, we leaned toward each other, a slow and natural closeness. Not hurried, not forceful, just a gentle acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between us over countless mornings spent in sun and soil. We worked together quietly after that, the garden taking on a new sense of intimacy. Every shared glance, every laugh, every brush of our hands felt like a conversation in itself. The physicality was subtle, our shoulders occasionally brushing, our hands almost touching as we reached for plants, but it was the emotional closeness that made it feel electric, alive, and deeply grounding at the same time. As the sun began its descent, casting a golden glow across the garden, we sat together on the edge of the flower beds, our legs stretched out in the soft grass. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who was patient, kind, and attuned to the quiet rhythms of life. I realized that our connection had grown from shared effort into something profound, a mutual understanding, a tender companionship that neither of us had rushed, but both had nurtured. "Julie," Jacob said, his voice low, "I've missed moments like this. Real moments where you can be yourself and not have to pretend or hide anything. With you, I can do that. And I hope you feel the same with me." I felt a wave of warmth and gratitude sweep over me. "I do," I said simply, my heart full. "I feel the same. I've never had someone notice the little things like you do, or make me feel so seen." We lingered there for a while, sharing quiet conversation and comfortable silence. I realized that our afternoons in the garden had become more than just a pastime. They had become a sanctuary, a place where trust, affection, and subtle intimacy could grow just like the flowers around us. As Jacob finally stood to leave, he hesitated, his gaze meeting mine with a soft intensity. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, the familiar hope in his eyes making my chest swell. "Yes," I replied, smiling. "I'd like that very much." Watching him walk back toward his house, I felt a sense of deep reflection settle over me. Life had a way of surprising you, even in your 40s, even when you thought your days were mapped out in predictable routines. What began as a simple offer to help in the garden had become a journey, an unexpected path to connection, trust, and tender companionship. That evening, I sat on the porch, sipping tea as the sky glowed pink and orange. The garden behind me, bathed in soft twilight, was a living testament to patience, care, and small joys nurtured over time. I thought about Jacob, about the way he had entered my life quietly, respectfully, and how that presence had illuminated something I had nearly forgotten: joy in shared moments, the subtle thrill of intimacy, and the beauty of allowing someone to truly see you. I smiled softly to myself, feeling a quiet contentment I hadn't experienced in years. The garden had been my refuge, but with Jacob, it had become something more, a place of possibility, growth, and gentle emotional discovery. And as the night settled in, I realized that life, even in its ordinary moments, could be extraordinary when shared with someone who truly mattered. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool night air, and thought with a tender certainty that this was only the beginning of more afternoons together, more laughter, more stories, and more moments where two lives quietly intertwined over soil, sunlight, and the subtle, enduring magic of connection.